A heartbeat. That was the sound that filled the room, a rapid, rhythmic swish-swish coming from the monitor. Then the cry of a new life. But for Audrey, the defining sound of that moment wasn't her son's first breath. It was the heavy, distinct thud of a thick manila envelope landing on the hospital bed sheets, right between her legs and the baby she had just pushed out. There were no flowers, no tears of joy from the father standing over her. Just a cold stare and a single sentence that froze the sweat on her brow. Sign these before the epidural wears off, or you'll be on the street by morning. She thought she was looking at the end of her life. She had no idea she was actually looking at the first chapter of his total destruction. The sterile air of the delivery room at MT. Sinai West usually smelled like antiseptic and latex, but to Audrey Keating, it smelled like exhaustion and iron. Her body was trembling, a common after-effect of labor, but her hands shook for a different reason as she clutched the hospital blanket. Minutes ago, the agony of 20 hours of labor had ceased, replaced by the slippery, warm weight of Leo. Her son. He was tiny, red-faced, and screaming, a beautiful, furious sound that confirmed he was alive and strong. "He's perfect," Audrey whispered, her voice raspy. She looked up, expecting to lock eyes with Brendan. She needed that shared moment of relief, the silent acknowledgement that they had created this human being together. Brendan Foster was standing at the foot of the bed. He was dressed not in the comfortable sweats he'd brought in his overnight bag, but in a crisp navy suit. He looked immaculate. While Audrey was covered in sweat, her hair matted to her forehead, Brendan looked like he was heading to a board meeting at his firm, Foster and Klein. He wasn't looking at Leo. He was looking at his watch. "Brendan," Audrey asked, her smile faltering. "Did you hear me?" "He has your nose." Brendan finally looked up. His eyes, usually a warm hazel, were flat. "Dead." There was a detachment in his gaze that Audrey had seen him use on telemarketers or waiters who messed up an order, but never on her. And certainly not 10 minutes after the birth of their first child. "The nurse is taking him to the nursery for measurements," Brendan said. His voice was devoid of inflection. "Wait, I haven't even held him for 5 minutes. Let them take him, Audrey. We have business to discuss." A nurse, sensing the plummeting temperature in the room, gently took the crying infant from Audrey's arms. I'll give you two a moment," she murmured, hurrying out with the bassinet. The door clicked shut. The silence was deafening. Brendan reached into his leather briefcase, which had been sitting on the visitor's chair. He pulled out a thick manila envelope. He didn't hand it to her gently. He dropped it onto the bed. It landed with a heavy thap sound against the sheets, inches from her knees. "What is this?" Audrey asked, her heart rate monitor picking up speed. "Beep. Beep. Beep beep." "Divorce papers," Brendan said. He didn't blink. "And a voluntary surrender of occupancy for the house." The world tilted. Audrey felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the medication. "Is this a joke?" Brendan, I just had our baby. The timing is necessary, Brendan replied, smoothing his tie. My lawyer advised that serving you now, while you're in the hospital, establishes immediate separation. It also proves you have no current income or stable housing, which will assist in the custody hearings. Audrey tried to sit up, but her body screamed in protest. Custody. Brendan, what are you talking about? We were laughing in the car on the way here. We picked out nursery colors last week. Brendan let out a short, derisive sigh. He walked to the window, looking out over the Manhattan skyline. We were not laughing, Audrey. You were talking. I was enduring. I've been enduring for 2 years. You're a librarian, Audrey. You make $40,000 a year. You have no family. No connections. You're stagnant. I supported you while you got your MBA, she cried out, tears mixing with the sweat on her face. I paid the rent on that shoebox in Queens so you could study, and that's exactly why I'm leaving. Brendan turned back, his face twisting into a sneer. Because you're a reminder of the shoebox. I'm a partner now. I need a partner who fits the life I'm building. Not a charity case orphan who thinks a Olive Garden date is high society. The word orphan hit her like a physical slap. Brendan knew that was her deepest wound. Growing up in the foster system in Ohio, bouncing between group homes until she aged out, Audrey had always felt like she belonged to no one. Brendan had promised her he was her family now. I'm taking the house in Scarsdale, Brendan continued, ticking points off on his fingers. Since the down payment came from my bonus and the mortgage is in my name, you have no claim. I've cancelled the joint credit cards as of this morning to prevent emotional spending. You have a checking account with about $500 in it. I suggest you use it to find a motel when you get discharged. You can't do this, Audrey sobbed, the shock turning into a panic attack. I have a newborn. I have nowhere to go. Brendan checked his watch again. That sounds like a you problem, not a me problem. Actually, it sounds like an argument for why I should have full custody. Unstable mother, homeless, no support system. The judge will hand Leo to me in a heartbeat. He walked to the door, hand on the handle. Hey, paused, looking back not with regret, but with annoyance. Sign the papers, Audrey. If you contest this, I will bury you in legal fees until you're begging for change on the subway. Jessica is waiting for me in the lobby. We have a dinner reservation. Jessica, Audrey gasped. Your assistant? She's not my assistant anymore, Brendan smirked, a cruel, triumphant expression. She's the VP's daughter. And my fiancée. Goodbye, Audrey. He walked out. Audrey sat alone in the dimming light of the hospital room, the divorce papers touching her leg, the empty bassinet in the corner, and the wailing realization that the man she loved had planned to destroy her at her most vulnerable moment. The next 48 hours were a blur of humiliation and administrative torture. Usually, new mothers leave the hospital in a wheelchair, holding their baby, with a husband pulling the car around, fussing over the car seat. Audrey left via a frantic Uber ride, her meager belongings stuffed into plastic hospital bags. Brendan hadn't been bluffing. When she tried to use the joint debit card at the hospital pharmacy to buy postpartum supplies and diapers, the machine flashed declined. The pharmacist, an older woman named Mrs. Higgins, had given her a pitying look and paid for the diapers herself. That act of kindness broke Audrey more than the cruelty had. She found a cheap, terrifyingly grimy motel on the outskirts of Yonkers. The room smelled of stale smoke and damp carpet. She placed Leo in the center of the bed, creating a fortress of pillows around him. "It's just us, Leo," she whispered to the sleeping infant. "Just us against the world." She opened the manila envelope. It was a massacre on paper. Brendan's lawyer, a shark named Gavin Thorpe, had constructed a narrative that painted Audrey as a parasitic, mentally unstable woman. They cited her unknown genetic history, a dig at her adoption, as a potential risk factor for the child. They offered a settlement, $5,000 relocation fee, in exchange for full physical custody going to Brendan, with Audrey getting supervised visitation every other weekend. If she didn't sign, they threatened to sue her for emotional distress caused to Brendan during the marriage, a frivolous claim, but one that would cost thousands to defend against. Audrey sat on the floor of the motel room, counting her cash. $412. That was it. That was the sum total of her life. She needed documents. She needed to apply for emergency assistance. She dug through her old duffel bag, the one she had carried since she was 16. It was battered, blue canvas, the only constant in her life. At the bottom of the bag was a small, locked metal box. Her orphan box, she hadn't opened it in years. It contained the few items she had been found with as a baby: a faded blanket, a silver rattle with no initials, and a sealed letter from the adoption agency that she had been told never to open unless she was in dire straits. "Well," she muttered, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I think this counts." She pried the box open with a nail file. The letter was yellowed, the envelope brittle. It was dated June 14, 1998. She tore it open. The handwriting was jagged, hurried. "To the caregivers of baby girl Doe, if you are reading this, the threat is real. Do not look for us. Do not let her use her real name. The people hunting my husband will use her to get to him. Her name isn't Jane. It's Genevieve. And she is the only heir to the Hamilton Trust. Keep her hidden. Keep her safe." Audrey frowned. She had read this letter before, years ago, but dismissed it as the ramblings of a birth mother on drugs. Hamilton Trust sounded like a made-up fantasy. She had Googled it back in 2010 and found nothing. But she had never Googled it on a smartphone in 2026. With trembling fingers, she typed Hamilton Trust into her cracked phone screen. Nothing. She typed Arthur Hamilton. The search results flooded the screen, nearly crashing her browser. Breaking news: tech and real estate mogul Arthur C. Hamilton dead at 72. Estate valued at $14 billion in limbo as lawyers search for mysterious beneficiary. Hamilton global stock plummets amidst succession crisis. Audrey stared at the phone. The date of death was 3 days ago. The exact day she went into labor. She looked at the photo of Arthur Hamilton. He had sharp blue eyes, a strong jawline, and a nose that looked exactly like the one on the baby sleeping on the bed behind her. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She wasn't just Audrey Keating, the librarian from Ohio. She was Genevieve Hamilton. But before she could process the magnitude of this, a heavy fist pounded on the motel door. Bang! 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 Audrey Keating. We know you're in there, it was Brendan's voice. And he wasn't alone. Audrey scrambled up, shielding Leo with her body. She cracked the door, leaving the chain on. Brendan stood in the hallway, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers and Jessica, who was wearing a white cashmere coat that probably cost more than Audrey's entire education. Jessica was holding a cell phone, recording. "Officers, that's her," Brendan said, pointing a manicured finger at Audrey. His face was a mask of faux concern. "She kidnapped my son from the hospital against medical advice. She's having a psychotic break. Look at this place. It's a drug den. I didn't kidnap him," Audrey screamed, panic rising. "I was discharged. I have the papers. She's delusional," Jessica chimed in, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Brendan, we have to get Leo out of there. The fumes alone." One of the officers stepped forward. "Ma'am, open the door. We need to do a welfare check on the infant. He's lying," Audrey pleaded. "He threw us out. He served me divorce papers in the delivery room. Ma'am, open the door or we will kick it in," the officer said, hand resting on his belt. Audrey looked at Brendan. He was smiling. A small, tight smile that said, "I told you I would win." She realized then that this wasn't just a divorce. This was an annihilation. He wasn't going to stop until she was in a cell or an institution. She unhooked the chain. As the officers pushed past her to grab the crying baby, Audrey's hands squeezed the crumbled yellow letter in her pocket. Brendan thought he was crushing a helpless bug. He had no idea he had just declared war on a dragon. The sensation of having a child ripped from your arms is not pain, it is an amputation of the soul. As the officer, Officer Miller, his badge read, pried Audrey's fingers from the bassinet handle, a guttural scream tore from her throat. It was a sound so raw, so animalistic, that even Jessica flinched, taking a half step back behind Brendan. "You're hurting him. You're scaring him," Audrey shrieked, lunging forward. "Restrain her," Brendan shouted, his voice cracking with a terrifyingly convincing performance of a panicked father. "She's violent. I told you she was violent. She threw a lamp at me in the delivery room. It was a lie. A bold, horrific lie." But in the cramped, dimly lit motel room, with Audrey looking disheveled, crying hysterically and smelling of sour milk and fear, she looked exactly like the manic woman Brendan was describing. Brendan, in his Italian suit, looked like the pillar of stability. The second officer, a burly man who clearly just wanted his shift to end, grabbed Audrey by the wrists and slammed her against the peeling wallpaper. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for child endangerment and resisting an officer. You have the right to remain silent." "I won't be silent. That's my son," Audrey sobbed, thrashing against the handcuffs as they clicked shut, biting into her wrists. Through the open door, she watched Brendan lift Leo from the bed. He didn't cradle the baby. He held him like a football, awkward and stiff. Jessica immediately began cooing, snapping a photo with her phone, likely for social media, to paint herself as the savior stepmother before the ink on the divorce papers was even dry. "Don't worry, Leo," Jessica said, loud enough for Audrey to hear. "Daddy and I have a nice, clean nursery waiting for you. No more dirty motels. Brendan, please," Audrey begged as they dragged her into the hallway. "He needs me. He's breastfeeding." "You can't just take him," Brendan stopped. He turned slowly, letting the officers drag Audrey past him. He leaned in close, so only she could hear over the squawking police radios. "I can," he whispered, his eyes cold and empty. "And I did. Enjoy Bellevue, Audrey. I hear the food is terrible." The ride to the precinct was a blur of flashing lights. "And nausea." Audrey didn't stop crying for 3 hours. She was processed, fingerprinted, and stripped of her shoelaces. Because of her erratic behavior, instigated entirely by the trauma of the moment, the police didn't put her in a holding cell. They called in a 72-hour psychiatric hold. She was transferred to Bellevue Hospital's psychiatric wing. For 3 days, Audrey Keating ceased to exist as a person. She became patient 409. She was placed in a room with a woman who hummed incessantly and scratched at the walls. The doctors asked her questions, but they were the wrong questions. "Do you hear voices? Do you want to hurt yourself? Why did you take the baby to a motel?" Every time she tried to explain, "My husband ambushed me with divorce papers during labor. He froze my accounts. I had nowhere else to go," the doctors would scribble in their notepads, nodding with patronizing sympathy. To them, it sounded like a classic persecution complex. Brendan had done his homework. He had likely called ahead, seeding the narrative of her mental instability. On the second night, sitting on the thin, plastic-covered mattress, Audrey felt a strange calm wash over her. It wasn't peace, it was the cold clarity of someone who has nothing left to lose. She reached into the pocket of her jeans, which had been returned to her after the initial intake search. Her fingers brushed against paper. The letter. In the chaos of the arrest, the officers had confiscated her bag, her phone, and her wallet. But the crumbled yellow letter from the orphan box had been shoved deep into her back pocket. They had missed it. She pulled it out, smoothing the wrinkles against her knee. Her name isn't Jane. It's Genevieve. And she is the only heir to the Hamilton Trust. She read it again. And again. Arthur Hamilton. The tech mogul. The man who owned half of Seattle and a third of New York's skyline. The man whose company, Hamilton Global, had just acquired the streaming service everyone used and the electric car company everyone drove. If this was real, if she really was his daughter, why had he left her? Why the foster homes? Why the poverty? The letter said, "The people hunting my husband will use her to get to him." He had hidden her to save her. Audrey looked at her reflection in the safety glass of the window. Her hair was greasy, her eyes sunken, her hospital gown stained. She looked like a victim. Brendan saw a victim. The world saw a victim. "No," she whispered. Her voice was raspy from screaming, but steady. "I'm not a victim. I'm a Hamilton." On the morning of the fourth day, the hold expired. The attending psychiatrist, Dr. Heiress, sat her down. "We don't see signs of active psychosis, Audrey," he said gently. "But you are in a high-stress situation. Your husband has been granted an emergency temporary custody order. You are not to approach him or the child until the court date next month." "I understand," Audrey said. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just needed to get out. They discharged her onto First Avenue with a Metro card, $12 in cash, and the clothes on her back. It was raining. A cold, grey New York drizzle that soaked her to the bone within seconds. She stood on the sidewalk, watching the yellow taxis splash by. She had no phone, no money, no baby, but she knew where she had to go. She walked to a public library on 23rd Street. The irony didn't escape her. Libraries were her sanctuary, her former career. She used a guest pass to access a computer. She searched for Hamilton Estate Executor. The name appeared instantly, Garrison Ford. Senior partner at Ford, Winstone and Goyle. His office was located at 30 Hudson Yards. The building was a glass fortress overlooking the river. Audrey printed the page. It cost her 10 cents. She walked. It took her an hour to trudge from the east side to Hudson Yards. Her shoes squelched. Her hair was plastered to her skull. She looked like a deranged, homeless woman. When she reached the lobby of 30 Hudson Yards, the marble floors reflected the high ceilings like a mirror. Men in $5,000 suits breezed past. The air smelled of expensive cologne and money. Audrey walked up to the security desk. The guard, a man with a neck as thick as a tree trunk, wrinkled his nose before she even spoke. "Restrooms are for customers only, lady." "Move along. I'm not here for the restroom," Audrey said, standing as tall as her 5'4" frame allowed. "I'm here to see Garrison Ford," the guard laughed. A short, barking sound. "Yeah, and I'm here to see the Pope." "Mr. Ford doesn't see walk-ins. Especially not." He gestured vaguely at her entire existence. "Tell him," Audrey said, her voice dropping an octave, channeling a power she didn't know she had, "that Genevieve is here. Tell him I have the letter from June 14, 1998. The guard hesitated. There was something in her eyes, a fierce, burning blue that cut through the grime of her appearance. It was the same blue that stared down from the portrait of Arthur Hamilton hanging in the lobby of the building next door. "I'm calling the cops if you don't leave in 10 seconds, the guard threatened, reaching for his radio. "Call them," Audrey challenged. "But if you throw out Arthur Hamilton's daughter, you'll be unemployed before lunch." The guard paused. He looked at her. Really looked at her. Then he picked up the phone. Not the radio. The phone. He dialed a number. He spoke in hushed tones, his eyes never leaving Audrey's face. His expression shifted from annoyance to confusion, and then to pure fear. He hung up. He swallowed hard. "Mr. Ford is coming down." Personally, Garrison Ford was a legend in the legal world. At 60 years old, he was known as the Iron Gate of the Hamilton Empire. He had silver hair, wore bespoke Savile Row suits, and was rumored to smile only when he destroyed a competitor's company. When the elevator doors dinged open, the lobby went silent. Garrison Ford never came down to the lobby. He strode across the marble floor, flanked by 2 junior associates who looked terrified. He stopped 5 feet from Audrey. He studied her. He looked at the wet sneakers, the jeans from Target, the matted hair. Then he looked at her eyes and the shape of her chin. Audrey didn't flinch. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the letter. She held it out. Ford took it. He produced a pair of reading glasses from his pocket, put them on, and examined the paper. He ran his thumb over the seal. He checked the handwriting. His hands, usually steady enough to sign billion-dollar mergers, trembled slightly. "It's real," he whispered. He looked up at Audrey. For the first time in decades, Garrison Ford looked shocked. "We thought you were dead," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Martha, he spent the last 10 years looking for you. The agency told us you died in a fire at the group home in 2004. I wasn't in the home that night," Audrey said. "I ran away. I was living on the streets for a week before another family took me in. The records were lost," Ford nodded slowly. "And the rattle." The letter mentioned a rattle. "It's in a police evidence locker in Yonkers," Audrey said bitterly. "Along with my dignity," Ford's expression hardened. The shock evaporated, replaced by the ruthless efficiency he was famous for. "Junior," he snapped at the associate to his left. "Call the car. Get Dr. Evans on the line for an immediate DNA verify. And get security to clear the private elevator." He turned back to Audrey. He didn't offer her a handshake. He offered her his arm. "Ms. Hamilton," he said, the name ringing out across the silent lobby like a bell. "Please come with me. We have a lot of work to do." As Audrey took his arm, she glanced back at the security guard. He was pale, staring at the floor. "You," Ford said to the guard without looking back. "You're fired." The next 6 hours were a whirlwind that made the trauma of the hospital feel like a distant nightmare. She was whisked to the penthouse suite, of the Mandarin Oriental. A medical team was waiting. They took a cheek swab. They treated the scrapes on her wrists from the handcuffs. They gave her a vitamin IV drip. While the lab rushed the DNA test, a process that usually took weeks, but for the Hamilton estate took hours, Ford sat with her. He told her the truth. Arthur Hamilton hadn't abandoned her. He had been a whistleblower against a massive organized crime syndicate in the 90s. The threats against his family were credible and imminent. His wife, Audrey's mother, had been killed in a car accident that was actually a hit. To save Audrey, he had to erase her. He placed her in the system with a fake identity, intending to retrieve her once the trial was over. But the trial dragged on for years. The records were sealed, then lost. When Arthur finally tried to find her, she had vanished into the cracks of the foster system. He died heartbroken, Ford said, looking at the rain streaking the penthouse windows. He left everything to you in a blind trust, hoping you'd surface. If you hadn't appeared within 30 days of his death, the entire estate, $14 billion, the real estate, the tech patents, would have been donated to the state. 30 days, Audrey asked. Today is day 27, Ford replied grimly. A phone rang. Ford picked it up. He listened for 10 seconds. He hung up. He looked at Audrey. A slow smile spread across his face. It's a match. 99.999%. He stood up and walked over to a briefcase on the mahogany table. He opened it and pulled out a black American Express Centurion card, the black card, and a sleek, encrypted smartphone. "Welcome home, Genevieve," he said. Audrey stared at the card. "I don't want to be Genevieve," she said softly. "I'm Audrey. Audrey is the one who survived. Audrey is the one who is a mother. Audrey Hamilton," then Ford corrected himself. "Now, Audrey. Usually, we would schedule a press conference. But you mentioned a situation. A husband. A child." Audrey's eyes went cold. "He took my son. He served me divorce papers in the delivery room. He told me I was nothing." Ford's eyebrows shot up. "He did he? What is his name?" "Brendan Foster. He just made partner at Foster & Klein." Ford let out a dry chuckle. He walked over to his laptop and tapped a few keys. He spun the screen around. "Is this him?" On the screen was a calendar entry for the Hamilton Global Board of Directors meeting, scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. Agenda Item 4, Legal Representation Proposal. Presenter, Brendan Foster, Partner, Foster & Klein. Audrey stared at the screen. Brendan was pitching to her company. He was trying to land the Hamilton account, the biggest legal whale in the city, to cement his status as a high-powered attorney. He had destroyed his wife to clear the decks for this new life, and now he was walking right into the lion's den. "He wants to work for Hamilton Global," Audrey said, a dangerous smile touching her lips for the first time in days. "He wants the retainer," Ford explained. It's worth about 20 million a year to his firm. Does he know? Audrey asked. Does anyone know about me yet? No one, Ford said. The DNA results are sealed. As far as the world knows, the heir is still missing. The board expects to dissolve the trust. Next week, Audrey stood up. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling mirror. She looked at her reflection. She saw the exhaustion, yes. But she also saw the fire. She saw the mother who would burn the world down to get her son back. Mr. Ford, she said, I need a stylist. I need a haircut. And I need a suit. A very expensive suit. What are you planning? Ford asked, intrigued. My husband likes strong women, Audrey said, turning to face him. He likes partners. He likes power. So I'm going to give him exactly what he wants. I'm going to that board meeting tomorrow. As an observer, Ford asked. No, Audrey said. As the chairwoman, the suite at the Mandarin Oriental had become a war room. It was 5:00 a.m. The city of New York was still waking up, a dark expanse of concrete and steel, but inside the penthouse, the lights were blazing. Audrey sat in a velvet chair, a team of 3 stylists working around her in hushed, efficient silence. One was applying concealer to the dark circles under her eyes, evidence of 5 days without her son and nights spent weeping in a psych ward. Another was cutting her hair. Her long, mousy brown hair, the hair she usually tied back in a messy bun with a scrunchie, was falling to the floor in clumps. Shorter, Audrey commanded, staring at herself in the mirror. Her voice was different. The tremor was gone. Are you sure, ma'am? The stylist asked, hesitating with the shears. Your jawline is very exposed. Expose it, Audrey said. I don't want to hide anymore. The scissors snipped. A sharp, angled bob emerged. It was severe, modern, and intimidating. It was the haircut of a woman who fired people, not a woman who shelved books. Garrison Ford sat on the sofa nearby, reviewing a stack of documents on an iPad. He looked up, nodding in approval. The board meeting starts at 9, Ford said. Brendan's firm, Foster & Klein, is presenting at 9:15. They are proposing a hostile restructuring of our legal department. Essentially, they want to fire our in-house counsel and replace them with their own team on a massive retainer. He wants to gut my father's company, Audrey said, her eyes narrowing as the makeup artist applied a sharp wing of eyeliner. Exactly. He's arguing that the Hamilton estate is rudderless, without an heir, and needs aggressive external management. He's using your absence to seize control. Audrey stood up. The stylist stepped back. She wasn't wearing the soft, floral dresses Brendan used to make her buy because they were feminine. She was wearing a custom-tailored white suit by Alexander McQueen. It was crisp, structural, and blazed like a beacon against the room's dark furniture. It cost more than the down payment on the house Brendan had kicked her out of. He thinks the heir is missing, Audrey said, sliding her feet into nude stilettos. She winced slightly, her body was still recovering. From childbirth, the stitches still healing, but she masked the pain with a grimace that looked like determination. He thinks he's walking into a graveyard to rob it. He is, Ford said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. He just doesn't know the grave is empty. 8:45 a.m. Hamilton Global Headquarters. The boardroom on the 50th floor was a masterpiece of intimidation. Walls of glass offered a panoramic view of the Hudson River. The table was a 20-foot slab of black marble. Seated around it were the 12 members of the board of directors, men and women who controlled the global economy. They looked nervous. The stock had dropped 4% since Arthur Hamilton's death. The sharks were circling. At the head of the table, the chairwoman's seat was empty. Brendan Foster stood at the front of the room, adjusting his projector. He looked every inch the conqueror. His suit was Italian, his watch was a Rolex Daytona, and his smile was practiced. Next to him sat Simon Klein, the senior partner of his firm. Klein was a legendary attorney, a man who had destroyed unions and bankrupt governments. He was grooming Brendan to be his successor. "You have this, Brendan," Klein whispered, checking his phone. "In the bag, Simon," Brendan replied, confident. "These people are desperate. They need a strong hand. I'm going to offer them security, just don't mention the personal situation," Klein warned. "We don't want any baggage. Audrey is handled," Brendan scoffed quietly. "She's in a facility. She won't be a problem." The heavy oak doors opened. "Gentlemen, ladies," the board secretary announced, her voice shaking slightly. "Hello." "The executor has arrived," Brendan smirked. He expected Garrison Ford. He was ready for Ford. He had a whole file prepared to discredit the old man as out of touch. Garrison Ford walked in. But he didn't sit at the head of the table. He remained standing, holding the door open. "Good morning," Ford said, his voice booming. "I apologize for the delay. There has been a development regarding the Hamilton Trust," the board members murmured. Brendan glanced at Klein, confused. "I thought the trust was dissolving today," Brendan whispered. "It was," Klein hissed. "Please welcome," Ford announced, stepping aside, "the chairwoman of the board, the sole beneficiary of the Hamilton estate, Ms. Audrey Hamilton." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum. Audrey walked in. The click of her heels on the marble floor sounded like gunshots. Clicky, clicky, clicky. She didn't look at the board members. She didn't look at the view. She looked straight at Brendan. Brendan's face went slack. The color drained from his skin so fast it looked like he was fainting. He gripped the edge of the podium, his knuckles turning white. He knew that walk. He knew those eyes. But he didn't know this woman. This wasn't the woman who cried over spilled milk. This wasn't the woman who begged him to stay. This was a predator. Audrey reached the head of the table. She placed her black clutch on the marble. She didn't sit. She stood, commanding the room. "You can close your mouth, Mr. Foster," Audrey said, her voice cool and amplified by the room's acoustics. "It's unprofessional," Brendan made a choking sound. "Audrey." "What? How did you get in here?" "Security," he looked frantically at the door. "This woman is. She's my estranged wife. She's mentally unstable. She just escaped from Bellevue." "Call the police." The board members looked from Brendan to Audrey, horrified. Simon Klein looked like he had swallowed a lemon. "Sit down, Brendan," Audrey said. "She didn't shout. She didn't have to." "Mr. Ford, please distribute the DNA verification and the deed of trust to the board." Ford slid a sleek folder to each member. "As you will see," Audrey continued, locking eyes with Simon Klein, "I am not Audrey Keating. I am Genevieve Hamilton, daughter of Arthur. And as of 8:00 a.m. this morning, I am the majority shareholder of this company." She turned back to Brendan. He was trembling. "And you," she said, a small, terrifying smile playing on her lips, "are currently trespassing." The air in the room was so thick with tension it felt flammable. Simon Klein was reading the DNA report. He was a smart man. He realized instantly that his protégé, the rising star Brendan Foster, had just led their firm into a woodchipper. "In a mess." "Hamilton," Klein stammered, standing up. "This is unexpected. We were under the impression that I was a charity case orphan," Audrey finished for him, quoting Brendan's words from the delivery room. "That I was stagnant. That I didn't fit the lifestyle of a partner." Brendan flinched as if she'd slapped him. "Audrey, please. Let's talk about this privately. You're emotional." "The hormones." "I am not emotional, Mr. Foster," Audrey cut him off, her voice slicing through the air. "I am business. And we are here to discuss your proposal." She picked up the leather-bound pitch deck Brendan had spent weeks perfecting. "Proposal for legal restructuring, Foster and Klein." "You want to represent Hamilton Global," Audrey said, flipping through the pages. "You argue here on page 10 that the company needs ruthless efficiency to cut liabilities." "Yes," Brendan said, his voice weak. He was trying to find his footing, trying to charm his way out of the abyss. "Yes, exactly. I believe in cutting dead weight." "Interesting," Audrey mused. "Because I've been reviewing your personal liabilities, Brendan. And I see a pattern of poor judgment." She tapped a button on the console in front of her. The giant screen behind Brendan, the one meant for his PowerPoint presentation, flickered. A document appeared. It wasn't a business chart. It was a copy of the divorce petition Brendan had filed. Petitioner Brendan Foster. Respondent Audrey Keating. Reason: irreconcilable differences. "You served these to a woman in active labor," Audrey said. The room went deadly silent. One of the female board members gasped hand to her mouth. "You evicted a newborn infant from his home less than 24 hours after birth," Audrey continued, her voice rising in intensity. "You froze the bank accounts of a nursing mother. You used your legal connections to fabricate a psychiatric hold to discredit a witness. She turned to Simon Klein. Mr. Klein, does Foster and Klein endorse these tactics? Is this the family values your firm advertises on its website? Klein was sweating profusely. Ms. Hamilton, I assure you, we had no knowledge of the specifics of Mr. Foster's domestic situation. This is a personal matter. It became a professional matter when he walked into my boardroom to ask for my money, Audrey snapped. She looked back at Brendan. He looked small. The expensive suit looked like a costume. You wanted a partner who fits your life, Brendan, she said softly. You wanted someone powerful. Someone who wasn't a reminder of the shoebox. She leaned forward, bracing her hands on the black marble. Well, here I am. I'm powerful. I'm rich. I'm a Hamilton. Brendan's eyes darted around the room. He saw the disgust on the faces of the board members. He saw the rage on Simon Klein's face. He knew his career was over. Audrey, he whispered, changing tactics. Baby, please. I did it for us. I was stressed. We can fix this. We can, Audrey laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. There is no we, there is the plaintiff, and there is the defendant. She turned to Garrison Ford. Mr. Ford, what is the current retainer Foster and Klein holds with our subsidiary companies? Approximately 15 million annually, Ford replied instantly. Cancel it, Audrey ordered. Effective immediately. And blacklist the firm from all future Hamilton contracts. Now wait a minute, Simon Klein shouted, slamming his hand on the table. You can't do that. We have contracts. Breach of contract will cost you millions. I have billions, Mr. Klein, Audrey said calmly. I can afford it. Can you? Klein stared at her. He calculated the cost of fighting a $14 billion estate. He looked at Brendan. You're fired, Klein snarled at Brendan. Get out. Pack your desk. You're done, Brendan stood frozen. His world had disintegrated in 10 minutes. His job, his reputation, his future. But Audrey wasn't finished. One more thing, she said as Brendan turned to leave, defeated. He stopped. You have my son, she said. Her voice dropped the business facade. The mother surfaced. You have Leo. I have temporary custody, Brendan said, a spark of defiance returning. The court gave it to me. You can fire me, Audrey, but you can't buy a judge. I'm his father. I have a home. You just have. Money, actually, Audrey said, pulling a final document from her folder. I have this. She slid a paper across the long table. It stopped right at the edge, in front of Brendan. It's a conflict of interest filing, she explained. Since your lawyer, Gavin Thorpe, works for a subsidiary of Foster and Klein, and since Foster and Klein was actively soliciting business from the Hamilton estate, me, while representing you in a divorce against me. Well, that's highly unethical. It's grounds for immediate dismissal of your counsel and a review of all orders obtained under false pretenses. Brendan picked up the paper. His hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. The emergency custody order was vacated 20 minutes ago by Judge Lawrence, Audrey said. He didn't like finding out he was being used as a pawn in a corporate takeover. She pointed to the door. My security team is waiting in the lobby, Brendan. They are going to escort you to your house in Scarsdale. You are going to hand over my son. You are going to hand over the diaper bag. And then you are going to leave. And if I don't, Brendan challenged, though his voice was barely a whisper. Audrey smiled. It was the smile of the dragon waking up. Then I will press charges for kidnapping, fraud, and extortion. And unlike you, I can afford the best lawyers in the world. I won't just bury you in legal fees, Brendan. I will bury you in prison. Brendan looked at her one last time. He looked for the girl he had bullied. She was gone. He turned and walked out the door, a broken man's. The boardroom was silent. Simon Klein cleared his throat, trying to salvage the wreckage. Ms. Hamilton, perhaps we can discuss. Get out, Audrey said, without looking at him. Klein left. Audrey stood alone at the head of the table. Her legs finally gave out. She sank into the leather chair, trembling. Garrison Ford walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. You did it, he said quietly. Not yet, Audrey whispered, staring at the door. I got the company. I destroyed his career. But I don't have Leo yet. She looked up at Ford, her eyes wet with tears. Take me to Scarsdale. I'm going to get my baby. The conv of 3 black Cadillac Escalades rolled into the quiet, tree-lined streets of Scarsdale like a funeral procession for a king. The neighbors, usually busy pruning their hydrangeas or washing their Teslas, stopped dead in their tracks. Curtains twitched. Dog walkers froze. In the middle vehicle, Audrey sat in silence. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She wasn't looking at the manicured lawns or the white picket fences that Brendan had idolized. She was looking at the GPS dot moving closer to the house that had been her prison. "We're here, Ms. Hamilton," the driver said, his voice low and respectful. They pulled up to the driveway of 42 Maplewood Drive. It was a beautiful house, a colonial revival with black shutters. Brendan had bought it to prove he had made it. To Audrey, it just looked like a coffin with windows. Jessica's white BMW was in the driveway. Audrey didn't wait for the security team to open her door. She shoved it open and stepped onto the pavement. The click of her heels on the asphalt was the only sound in the neighborhood. Behind her, Garrison Ford and 4 large men in suits emerged. They moved with the precision of a SWAT team. Audrey walked up the paths. She didn't knock. She rang the doorbell, long, hard, and insistent. The door swung open. Jessica stood there, wearing a silk robe, a glass of white wine in her hand at 11:00 a.m. She looked annoyed, expecting a delivery driver. When she saw Audrey, the sleek hair, the tailored McQueen suit, the cold fire in her eyes, she dropped the wine glass. It shattered on the porch, sending shards of glass and Chardonnay everywhere. "Audrey," Jessica gasped, stepping back. "What? What are you doing here?" "Brendan said you were in Bellevue." "Brendan lied," Audrey said, stepping over the broken glass. She walked into the foyer. The house smelled of Jessica's perfume, something cloying and floral that masked the scent of the baby. "You can't be here," Jessica shrieked, finding her voice. "This is private property." "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Garrison Ford said, stepping into the doorway behind Audrey. He held up a sheaf of papers, stamped with the seal of the New York Supreme Court. "We have a court order for the immediate return of the minor child, Leo Foster, to his mother. And we have a police escort arriving in 3 minutes to enforce it." Jessica's face went pale. She looked at Ford, then at the security team filling her hallway. "Where is he?" Audrey asked. Her voice wasn't loud, but it echoed through the house. A thin, wailing cry answered her. It was coming from upstairs. Audrey didn't wait for an answer. She bolted up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, louder than her footsteps. She burst into the nursery. It was unrecognizable. The soft yellow walls she and Brendan had painted were gone, covered in a garish, expensive wallpaper. The crib she had picked out was in the corner, but it was filled with stuffed animals that still had price tags on them. And there, in the center of the room, in a vibrating swing, was Leo. He was red-faced, screaming, his tiny fists bunching the air. His diaper was heavy. He looked abandoned in a room full of expensive things. "Leo," Audrey choked out. She scooped him up. The moment his skin touched hers, the screaming stopped. He let out a shuddering breath, his little body relaxing instantly against her chest. He knew her scent. He knew her heartbeat. "I've got you," she whispered, burying her face in his soft, downy hair. "Mama's here. I've got you, don't touch him." Jessica appeared in the doorway, panting. "Brendan has custody." "You're kidnapping him." Audrey turned slowly. She looked at Jessica with a mixture of pity and revulsion. "Brendan doesn't have custody, Jessica. Brendan doesn't even have a job." Jessica blinked. "What? Check the news," Audrey said, shifting Leo to her hip. "Or just ask him yourself." Downstairs, the front door slammed. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. Brendan appeared in the nursery doorway. He was disheveled, his tie loose, his face gray with shock and defeat. He looked at Audrey, holding their son. He looked at Jessica, who was staring at him with wide, fearful eyes. "Brendan," Jessica asked, her voice trembling. "What is she talking about? Why is your phone blowing up?" Brendan ignored her. He looked at Audrey. For a moment, the old Brendan was there, the man who had once loved her. He looked at the baby. He looked at the luxury of the nursery. "I just wanted..." Brendan started, his voice cracking. "I just wanted us to be someone, Audrey. I wanted us to matter. We did matter, Audrey said softly. We were a family. That's all that mattered. She walked past him. He didn't try to stop her. He couldn't. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that he was just a ghost in his own home. By the way, Audrey said, pausing at the top of the stairs. She looked back at the couple, the broken man and the mistress, who was already realizing she had bet on a losing horse. I'm buying the mortgage on this house next week, Audrey said. The bank is very eager to sell to Hamilton Global. I suggest you start packing. I hear the rental market in Queens is very competitive right now. She walked down the stairs, out the front door, and into the sunlight. As she settled into the leather seat of the Escalade, Leo asleep in her arms, Garrison Ford closed the door. Where to, Ms. Hamilton? He asked from the front seat. Audrey looked down at her son. She looked out the window as the house and her old life disappeared in the rearview mirror. Home, she said. Take us home. That is the story of Audrey Keating, the woman who was discarded like trash only to rise like a phoenix. It's a reminder that you never truly know who you are dealing with, and that sometimes rock bottom is just the solid foundation you need to build an empire. Brendan Foster chased wealth and status, costing him the only true wealth he had, his family. Audrey found her fortune, but she never forgot that her real treasure was the little boy in her arms. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, redemption, and secret billions, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. Share this video with a friend who needs a reminder that the best revenge is massive success. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.